All right, so I'm going to show you how to mortise railings to accept a square 1/2 inch metal baluster. Now I've got them all done here, and I'm just going to walk you through the process and explain a few things about the machine I'm using and also the way I did the layout and lots of little tips to benefit you if you decide to do this on your own. All right, so this system I'm going to show you involves mortising square holes in the bottom railing on a balcony and also on a rake railing, and then having a plowed or grooved rail on the top where I'm going to put the baluster into and then put fillets in between. Now you can do both. You can potentially do the mortise holes on top and bottom railing, but it is a lot more difficult to do. And if you think about the physics of putting a steel baluster between two railings, the issue is that you have to drill your top hole twice as deep as your bottom hole so you can drive the railing up into the top rail and then push it down into the bottom rail. The other thing I've seen on YouTube is a situation where carpenters have attached the top rail after by sliding it down on 20-some balusters. This is a job that I'm sure that if you do it once, you'll never want to do it again. And it's not something I choose to do. So I'm going to show you the system that I like the best is mortising the bottom railing, installing the baluster in such a way that I can drive it into the bottom railing and then slide it into the groove on the top railing and then put fillets in after at the appropriate spacing. Now for this process, I'm going to be using the King Industrial 1050 5/8 hollow chisel mortiser. And it is a somewhat portable unit. It weighs just over 100 pounds, and I've got it attached to my workbench. I'll show you how I attach it to a piece of plywood so that I can move it from my shop onto the work site and maybe mount it on some kind of portable workbench. How sturdy that will be remains to be seen. But this machine is quite capable. This is a used one, new to me, and it was kind of interesting to go through the process of setting it up, and I am going to do a proper review, and I'll put a link here. But basically, I did the mortise process on this machine right here on the workbench. Now, what is interesting about the King mortiser is that it's a tilting head mortiser, so you can do perpendicular mortises, in other words 90-degree mortises, and also you can do up to and over 30 degrees, and with some adaptations you could get right into the 40-degree area. So I have done the rake railing on this machine, and here it is. Here's the finished product. It worked out really well. That rake railing is going to sit like so, and you can see that those holes are done at the same angle as the rake cut, which in this case is 35 degrees. I'm really happy with how those turned out, and just so you know, I did those first because I felt that the bit needed to be maximum sharpness to do those angled cuts, and it seemed to work out really well. I did buy a new bit, and I purchased it through Amazon. I'll leave a link in the description. I did have to sharpen that bit, and of course I did practice substantially on some scrap pieces of railing so that I was making my mistakes on waste material, not on the real railing. And I would say that a digital level box like this one would be a must-have piece of equipment for doing angled mortises. All right, so let's get to work here. I'm going to tilt this machine down to the appropriate angle, but the simplest thing to do is place your rake railing onto the fence and lower the tilting head until your mortising chisel is in line with the angle. Tighten it up. That is the angle of your mortises. All right, so you can see that this is not physically easy. You have to put a fair bit of force into plunging that mortise bit. But it's not terribly bad. I would say that the silicone spray or whatever dry lube that I'm using does make a big difference. Now that I've got that bit dialed in, so the auger bit is protruding just a wee bit from the hollow core chisel, it seems to be working really well. Now the next step is that I've got my 2 middle holes done, and regardless of what way I go, I run into interference with a clamp or something or other. So I'm going to readjust the position of the railing and then get those other holes done. Last hole. Tight, tight, tight. All right, well, so we'll just take this thing, take this railing out of the clamps here and give it a little inspection and see what the end product's going to look like. So hopefully it'll pass in the dark. All right, so that looks pretty decent to me. I'll clean these up a little bit with a 1/4-inch chisel, and we'll just test and see if the baluster goes in okay. All right, so I got these holes cleaned up with a chisel. I would say that's acceptable. I would say it's pretty decent, and I think when the whole thing's assembled and stained and everything else, I don't think I would hesitate to do this again for a customer. I would say though that it is a little more time consuming. Well, substantially more time consuming if you've never done it before, but I think it would be well suited if somebody wanted this kind of thing for a neater, cleaner look on the bottom rail, especially where you're going to be looking at it all the time. All right, so how did I get my spacing calculations? Well, the railing itself, 104.5, plus the thickness of one baluster is 1/2 inch. So 105, and I divide that by 4.5. So the maximum spacing is 4, and then the baluster center to center is again 1/2 inch. So I divide 105 by 4.5, and I get 23.33. So you can't have 23.3 spaces. You have to go up, always go up. So 105 divided by 24 gives me 4.375, but I'd subtract the thickness of one baluster to get my spacer or my fillet length. So the space between the balusters will be 3.875, which is 3 7/8 in carpenter language. So I simply cut a spacer at 3 7/8 and use that in conjunction with my metal baluster to do my spacing. Now, this 3 7/8 spacer means that there's 24 spaces and 23 balusters. So there's always one less baluster than there is spacers. All right, so here is my last baluster mark, and my spacer is hanging over 3/16 of an inch, which is totally acceptable. And probably what's happening here is that, I'm gaining a bit on the pencil lines, but in the big picture, that does not matter one bit. Now I just tripped across a great way to set up the fence is just by using a piece of plowed railing. And I've got that lined up with the bit, so I know I'm lined up for the center of the railing. All right, so I've got the bottom balcony rail set up on the mortiser. I've got everything lined up here, locked down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the depth gauge when I get the bit about right to the bottom of this little opening here. So that'll be roughly 7/16 or half an inch, and that'll be deep enough. That way they'll be all consistent as well. There we go. Now I can just loosen this knob here and make the fine tuning right about like so. Should do it. Lock it up. Turn it on. Loosen it off. Slide to the next spot. Tighten it back. Bring it down. Make a little adjustment. Bob's your uncle. Here's my last hole. And we're done. 23 holes. All right, so there is the bottom railing with the baluster holes all done. I would say that this is ultimately a really nice job. I'm just going to clean out all the holes with a chisel, remove the debris at the bottom. And before I sign off, I will give you a list of tips that I would use when mortising for these balusters. Well, I hope that video was helpful. As mentioned, I will go through some tips on how to do this effectively. First of all, I would say that if you're new to using a mortising machine, take ample time to get things set up properly. Definitely use a scrap piece to practice on, and just be patient and don't be in a rush. There's several things that I found helpful. One was for sure using some dry lube or silicone spray on your bit. The other thing is I found that a couple of times the way I had it set up, the auger bit was coming proud of the square mortise, and subsequently I adjusted the bit inside the chuck and was able to fine tune it a little bit so it was dead center on the hollow core mortiser. So that helped very much. I also moved my clamps on the bench here so that they were tighter to the base of the mortise machine. I found there was a little bit of flex in the mortiser the way I had it attached. What I may do is add another piece of plywood, stiffen that up a little bit. And I guess if you were to buy a stationary base for the mortiser, that it's available from King, you would have some better results, just a little bit more solid, but keep in mind it's not going to be a portable mortiser. If you're mortising on the job site, of course, you can't have it attached to a base because it's just too hard to move around. The other thing is to keep these chisels sharp. I found that even a brand new mortising bit, again, it was something I bought from Amazon. I found that there was getting some tear out on the cuts. So I did fine tune the sharpening using a stone that's designed for mortising bits, and that helped. I made sure that I ran it over the diamond stones as well to clean up the outside, clean off the burrs. Yeah, I would say that definitely the bit seems to work better the closer it is to the hollow core mortiser without touching. So you can't have the mortising segment of the bit and the auger rubbing together. There has to be a little bit of space, and I had to fiddle with that a little bit when I was doing that process. I would make sure that that auger bit is nice and tight into the mortising chisel, especially when you're doing the angled mortises, because when you think about it, if that bit is sticking out past the chisel too far, it will grab and then move because you're going at an angle. So anyway, yeah, I think it made a really nice job. I'm really happy with the results. I have to clean it up with a chisel and sand all these railings before I take them to the painter. So finally, I would say that if you're experienced with using a mortising machine on railings, certainly leave me some tips and insights that you have, because again, this is my first time using a mortising machine for railings. That's the story. And please like the video, leave me a comment, and thanks for watching. See you on the next one. Take care. All right, so I'm going to show you how to mortise square holes for square balusters using the King hollow core mortiser model 1050. I've got my head on tilt for a reason.